Ryan Dawson of the Anti-Neocon Report, and Mike Rivero from whatreallyhappened.com and several different radio programs. I've known Mike for a long time. We're going to be talking about some of the great lies of 2022, cover some of the stories that he's had over on his website, and of course, the main crux is FTX, the multi-billion-dollar swindle from Sam Bankman-Fried. Mike, it's good to see you. How you been?
Busy, obviously, and I also call him Sam Bankman-Fried. I know that's not his real name, but it just seems like really kind of an appropriate label to put on this guy. And it seems like every once in a while we have one of these major economic frauds. We had Enron, otherwise known as the Crooked E. We had Bernie Madoff. We had the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud back in 2008. Now we've got FTX. And it's a complicated issue, but the question always is, how do these guys get away with this? Why is there no government regulation, or is government regulation a bad thing in the context of cryptocurrency?
Well, yeah, I don't think regulations or deregulations are intrinsically good or bad. It depends on what the regulation is. And the problem with most government regulations are that they're written by lobbyists, and so they don't really protect consumers or anything. Whenever we actually get regulations, it's more tailored for protectionist policies than it is to stifle crime. I mean, you mentioned the mortgage-backed security fraud too. Janet Yellen was a large part of that, and Sam Bankman-Fried, her, Zuckerberg, Zelensky, who's another career criminal oligarch from Ukraine, all met in New York at the same symposium to talk about business, and collectively they swindled trillions.
They absolutely did. And this gets back to the issue of regulation, because it was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act that allowed the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud to even happen, when investment banks merged with depositor banks and started using customers' money for high-risk investments. And we're seeing a lot of the same thing here with FTX, where Sam Bankman-Fried, instead of taking his investors' money to purchase cryptocurrency with, he basically treated it like a personal piggy bank. He spent a lot of it on himself. He spent a huge amount of it giving donations to the Democrats for the midterm elections. And I think Sam kind of discovered one of the secrets to success in the United States, that you can do any crime you want as long as you cut the government in for a piece of the action. And now that the bankruptcy may claw some of that money back, I think Sam's political support is going to evaporate.
Yeah, you can look at his bail. I think it was set at 250 million, and they only put up 4 million worth of collateral. I think it was his parents' property or something, and then he went.
Well, there are two other guarantors of the bail, but the court has agreed to keep them secret.
Oh, I see. Yeah, he was number 2 behind George Soros as far as donating to Democrats. He did give a little to some key Republicans as well, some rhinos, I guess people would call them. But he knows how to pay the right people. I mean, he's able to move around freely. He goes to symposiums, living with his parents, and he swindled people out of billions of dollars. And
Yes, he
as
did.
you alluded to, the mortgage-backed security firms, they not only did they repeal Glass-Steagall and divide the investment bank, but they sold the securities to third parties, who were then they were no longer responsible if they didn't
They
pay the
broke the
loan. So,
securitization chain, and that's why it cascaded completely out of trouble. Now, cryptocurrency, of course, is seen as a threat both by the government and by the traditional banking entities, and they are trying to use FTX and its collapse, or maybe they even engineered FTX's collapse to justify bringing crypto underneath the control of the bankers and the U.S. government, because the last thing they want is for ordinary people to have a medium of exchange or currency that is operating outside of these controls.
right. Well, it seems to be two different problems. One, if you wrap it under the control of government, I mean, they can just cut you off. You can see the government's freezing people's bank accounts now over political opinions. They'll just take your money. Didn't do
Yes,
that
they
to
will.
Jeffrey Epstein, but they did it to well, formerly known as Kanye West, now known Ye. Um, I've had banks closed. I've had friends. They just go, nope, this you can't have this money. You can't use PayPal. You can't use Patreon.
Yes,
You can't. They'll kick you off payment processes for political beliefs.
I have been kicked off PayPal myself.
I've been kicked off crypto exchanges too. So they couldn't. I can have a wallet, but I can't cash out or in. So they're kind of useless.
Well, I never really got into crypto to begin with. At the time, I was living in Hawaii, and Hawaii actually passed some very restrictive laws on crypto. And I said, it's going to be more trouble than it's really worth. So I didn't get into that. Also, of course, I'm leery of any currency that does not have a commodity base,
Yes.
because then it's wide open for manipulation. And I remember some of the dollar devaluations we saw back in the 1980s, where you'd go to sleep one night and the next morning you'd wake up and they'd say, well, your dollar internationally is only worth half of what it was yesterday. And so the price of
Oh my gosh, we just lost him, and he's back.
lost our connection. Ah, there we are.
Yeah, I was
We're
scared.
back.
Yeah, he's talking about the dollar, and suddenly bloop.
Yeah, and they just cut the wire.
You
Yeah.
say so? You were saying in the '80s you'd wake up and the dollar had been depreciated by half. That
Yeah,
sort of
there
happened
was
to
a
the Japanese
massive
yen
dollar
this year.
devaluation, supposedly to enhance foreign trade, and all of a sudden, Japanese TVs and Japanese cars cost twice as much as they had the day before, and that is a tremendous loss of freedom for the American people, because the way our country was originally set up, the dollar was defined in the Constitution as a weight measure of silver or its equivalent value in gold. And once that was in your pocket, it was completely under your control. The banks couldn't change it, the government couldn't change it. And with the establishment of the Federal Reserve and the delinking of our currency from silver back in the 60s, all of a sudden the banks could just, magically wave a wand and change the value of the money you had already worked for and earned.
It makes it easier for them to pay off their own debts.
Yes.
It's the hidden tax, the inflation tax. Ron Paul's spoken ad nauseum about this,
Yes, it is.
and I was delighted to see around 2008 or so. I think because this is before YouTube was sold to Google. I think it happened the end of that year. There was that presidential campaign, and a lot of people talking about the Fed, fractional reserve banking. It was because of films that went out, like Money Masters from Bill Stills, maybe later Zeitgeist, and some others that had the whole nation talking about fractional reserve banking, about how the history of money, how it was made, about the Fed issuing it out as debt. That was a conversation that really hadn't been spoken about for generations. That sort of
Well, it's
ended with
certainly not
Lincoln.
the way we're taught in our public schools about how the monetary system works. And, I remember when I was a kid, they would have a little film strip about how great the Federal Reserve was, and this was the best possible system for our nation to be operating under. And now, of course, with the government debt now over $30 trillion,
Hmm.
we understand that private central banking is a debt trap. It is a means to enslave the people and the governments to debt. And that debt becomes a very potent weapon to change global policy with.
So with FTX, they had some. I guess there was Alameda as well. I believe was supposed to act as their Robin Hood. The Robin Hood is what um, the company that would do free trades, but they were gathering data so they could get ahead of the curve. They would know
Mm-hmm.
who the investors were, so they could either ride that wave or bet against their own customers. Even with that sort of inside scoop, they still squandered the money. So I'm not sure how much
Yeah,
it was bad
they did. They
investments
just went
versus
on a
just
spending
spent it on.
spree, and
Yes, yes, spending
finally,
spree.
one of the watchdog organizations published an article saying that there was something not adding up here, and this led to another company that had been looking to acquire FTX to change their mind and basically drop their holdings. And so FTX went from a company with a $32 billion valuation into Chapter 11 in the matter of just days. And the new CEO was the guy who guided Enron through its bankruptcy. So there's an expert hand there as well. But again, we just see these kind of financial frauds happen on a regular basis, and the public wants their investment money protected, and the bankers say no, we can regulate ourselves, and yet these disasters keep happening.
I think they were even family related to some of the regulators in government. The what's her name, Carol Ellis, or is it?
Yes.
She looks like a troll. That's all I remember. They're related to.
Let's not get personal.
Well, yeah, she did fall out of the ugly tree and hit every branch. Let's just say
Yes.
that. Some of the, well, I think it's from all the Adderall and weird drugs they were doing. They had designer type drugs and staying awake 30 hours at a time. That'll put a toll
Hmm.
on your face.
That
And
will take a toll.
when
That
you're
will take a toll.
20 something years old and hopped up on all these pills and designer drugs, and you're supposed to be doing, $1 million trades, these people they had no risk assessment apparently, and they would approve of loans on a chat with emojis of like smiley or frown face.
Yeah.
That was like, I'm not a pro regulation guy usually, but not an anarchist. There has to be some degree of risk assessment and rules. The problem is when you start to say that, people are like, oh, so you want to regulate everything like the Fed? Da, da, da. I think there's a middle ground there where you can have some reasonable laws and regulations on a company without using those
Well,
big.
yeah, it would be nice to find that middle ground. And I don't know what's going to happen to Sam Bankman-Fried now that his political support is collapsing. They may throw him in jail with Bernie Madoff. But the sad reality is that all those people who lost all those billions of investment dollars, they're never going to get it back. They're never going to see it again. It's just gone.
Wasn't Mr. Wonderful, what's his name, Leary? Forget his first. O'Leary's his last name. He lost a lot of money in that. He's one of the Shark
Yes,
Tank
he
guys.
did.
Yeah, such a crocodile tear I have for him. but there were a lot of regular people that trusted them with their money. I guess my advice to people is, if you are going to dabble in crypto, do not keep your money on an exchange. Keep it in a hard wallet. Only put it on
Yes.
the exchange when you're going to sell it, like the minimal amount of time to put it on there, sell it, get your cash, put that somewhere else. Because exchanges do get hacked, or they say they get hacked or something, or they spend it without telling you. Another thing they're doing, and I think Binance is guilty of this, they'll say, we're not spending customer funds. Like, yeah, but you're using customer funds as IOU collaterals, and you're spending that. And so you are
Yes.
spending their funds. Very similar to
Well, they're placing them at risk.
yes, similar to the insurance fraud that happened during the securities crisis, where they had collateralized debt obligations, where multiple people took out insurance on one security or one property. You can't do that.
Yeah, the derivatives really multiply the damage. I mean, derivatives are, of course, transactions whose value is based on other transactions. And when the economy is booming, derivatives can make a huge amount of money. But when the economy reverses, derivatives become a weapon of mass destruction. And right now, the global exposure in derivatives is something over $250 billion. And if that were
Oof.
all to come apart at the same time, you're looking at a global depression.
People were mad about the stagnation of Bitcoin, but I think stagnation is actually good, because if it goes up or down too fast, it's too volatile for people to accept it for the exchange of goods. Because if it
I
goes
agree.
up too quick, the seller doesn't want to get rid of it because they want to hold on to their coin. If it goes down too quick, no one wants that. You don't want to hold. The buyer gets drafted. So stability is actually a good thing. If it just sits at 19,000 for a long time and doesn't
Hmm.
have all that volatility, then more businesses will be up to saying, oh, okay, it doesn't really budge one way or the other. I can use this as a medium of exchange to sell my products. The reason I wouldn't sell my own products on Bitcoin is because it was just all over the place. So I'm like, well,
Yeah,
either I'm getting
especially
ripped off or my customer's getting ripped off. I don't want to use this. Like,
yeah, in the wake of FTX, all of the cryptos took a major hit. One other exchange was also forced into bankruptcy. And this gets back to my comment about for a currency to be stable and reliable and usable, it's got to have a commodity base: silver,
Yes.
gold, units of electricity, the special white seashells we find on the shore,
Wampum.
but there has to be a commodity base.
Wampum actually was a purple yellow
Yes.
seashell that was used as a currency. Still find those in Hatteras Island all the time, but at
Well,
a certain rate.
one of the wonderful things, I have a small collection of ancient coins from like Rome. And even though the Roman Empire is long gone, those coins are still worth what they were worth when they were first minted, because they're made out of silver. And, the inherent worth is in the unit of money itself. With our Federal Reserve note, you don't have that. With crypto, you don't have that. And that's another reason why I steered clear of crypto, is that lack of a commodity base on which to rest, a solid valuation.
I agree. I agree with that. I think crypto is more just people put a lot of hopium into it, thinking, "Oh, look, it's different. This will save us all." And I thought, no, the exchanges are corrupt. It's not based on a commodity. It's too volatile. It's not widely accepted. Then you have all these new imaginary coins coming out that are pegged to either Ethereum or Bitcoin. There's so many problems with it. And it gets
Hmm.
manipulated by governments. Like China could just say, yeah, we're not doing this. And boom, the bottom will fall out. Or some regulation somewhere could happen and it gets nailed. What was Silvergate? Was that like an appraisal or like insurance? They're supposed to come in and see what FTX was doing and how valid it was. And they just did nothing. They didn't really look at it.
Yeah, basically, FTX avoided any kind of outside oversight or investigation. And again, Sam Bankman Fraud was just treating FTX like his own personal piggy bank. And I guess just having that kind of money just went to his head. And uh, talking about smoking hopium, he was just, figuring it would somehow work itself out, but it certainly did not. And what he seems to be doing, or seems to have done rather, is FTX was kind of a money laundry where they could plunder these investors, launder the money, and then donate it to Democrats for the midterm elections.
That is interesting because um, I know they were cycling money through Ukraine from basically from Congress to Ukraine to FTX back to Democrats. But I was talking to Larry C. Johnson, who was a CIA analyst and State Department analyst, and he said that before Binance got rid of the intermediary coin, the FN or whatever the heck it was, that the initial investigation at FTX was actually months ago by the DEA on money laundering charges.
Okay.
So probably moving around drug money for somebody. But that is something that a lot of the Ukrainian oligarchs had used as a sort of way to explain how guns and things would just pop up because they were part of the global arms market.
Hmm.
Long time ago, I interviewed Brad Hoff. He reminded me of the story of Joseph Schmitz, who was the inspector general for George Bush, did a deal with Ukrainians to get over 21 million rounds and some tens of thousands of guns to moderate rebels in Syria. The CIA stopped it at the last second because they're like, hey, this is our backyard. But there was this arms market out of Ukraine. The arms market is tied to the drug market because that's how they explain the black market profits, even though really it's just oligarchs financing it directly. So this is an interesting thing because in the Caribbean, where Bahamas is where they were stationed, it's also where money was laundered to the Norwegian shooter Breivik, and it's
Hmm.
also where Jeffrey Epstein and Jean-Luc Bernal and those cohorts all had their banks in St. Thomas and moving money through there for the Israelis. So I think this story is much bigger than just like young kids that screwed up and spent too much of their customers' money on themselves. This seems to be tied to a bigger ring, and it seems to definitely
I would
involve
agree, or
leadership of the Democratic
otherwise
Party.
he would not have been allowed to do what he did for as long as he did. It does feel like it was an operation tied in with intelligence services, and again, multiple agendas: laundering money for Ukraine, getting the public on board with government regulation of cryptocurrencies, and they're definitely pounding on that idea right now.
I think the government's being opportunist and say they hated crypto anyway because it allows people out from under their thumb. So they're going to
Hmm.
use this to say, "Oh, we need all these different regulations on crypto now, and we're going to tax it." Well, they already tax it, but not really because people just don't claim it. They don't have a real way of knowing how much was sold or not yet. They're going to use that as a pretext of anytime they can make the government bigger and have more power over anything, they're going to do that. But
I
I'm
agree.
also interested in that tie, though, to Ukraine with the arms smuggling, because Hunter Biden did work for Ihor Kolomoisky's Burisma Holdings, who is a notorious oligarch with a total disdain for Vladimir Putin, who threw a lot of these people in jail or exiled them. And so there's a human trafficking, gun running, all the worst stuff, and the Bidens are neck deep in it with
Yes.
uh, with that, and in tied to Rosemont Senchika's connection to some Chinese oligarchs as well. I mean, they're everywhere, and the media just doesn't touch this. If they talk about Hunter's laptop, it's only the sexual stuff. It's not all the economic ordeals. Same thing with Jeffrey Epstein. They focus completely on the child rape, which is definitely a horrendous crime, but not the white collar crimes he was doing with Bear Stearns, Deutsche Bank, and so on. Although they are being sued, but the woman, the attorney general, Virginia something, I forget her last name, uh, not Virginia Roberts, the victim, but attorney general for the Virgin Islands,
Yeah, and she got fired,
got
for
fired.
daring to file charges against J.P. Morgan, which was acting as the banking clearinghouse for Jeffrey Epstein to pay people and to get payments. And yeah, George Bush goes down there on his little holiday get together, and the
Mhm.
next thing you know, this prosecutor is fired, which is reminiscent of how. Joe Biden got the Ukrainian prosecutor who was looking into Burisma fired.
Yeah, and said so on tape, his quid pro
Yes,
quo, both to the CF Council on Foreign Relations meeting tape, and then we also have the Anti-Corruption Agency of Ukraine that released that, which got yanked from YouTube immediately. So
yes, immediately.
it's on
Well,
BitChute, but
YouTube's
then
kind
that
of
started
useless
coming with
these
a
days.
warning. If you put any BitChute video on Twitter, it still says warning, this site it could hack you and blah, 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 to try to scare
Yes.
you away from. So BitChute's pretty much free speech absolutist. And there's a lot of kook stuff on there too, but there's everything on there. That's how it ought to be. I mean, it's constitutionally we're supposed to have freedom of speech, including if it's dumb, offensive, or whatever, doesn't matter. You're supposed to have a right to say it as long as you're not threatening to kill somebody or something. It should be allowed, but they're not going to touch this. And FTX has also seemed to have caused a sort of general skepticism in crypto in general. All of them, all the coins took a hit on this
Yes,
because of
they
this
did.
exchange. You think they're worried about regulations coming in from within the U.S.? That seems to be most Bitcoin holders are Americans. But like with Bitcoin, it's like nine
Yeah,
guys own
obviously
like
they're going to be
90% of the
concerned
coins.
about regulation because there's a concern that government uses the regulation for its own purposes and not really to protect the American people. I mean, the fact that Enron got away with what they got away with, Bernie Madoff got away with what they got away with, and certainly up to a point, Sam Bankman-Fried got away with it. The government is not paying attention to what's actually affecting American investors. It's just all about control and tax revenues and ending a competition to the Federal Reserve note, which is really what cryptocurrencies represent. And you need to remember back, John F. Kennedy tried to pry the United States away from the Federal Reserve with the issuance of the United States note, which had a commodity basis in silver. And on the Warren Commission, there was a member, John J. McCloy, who was president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care what kind of a banker he is, he has no qualifications for investigating a homicide. So he was there to make sure that the link between Kennedy's assassination and the United States note remained hidden from the American public.
Kennedy was inspecting Dimona for nuclear weapons.
Yeah, Kennedy did not want Israel to get nuclear weapons, and a lot of people hated Kennedy. You know, organized crime felt that he double crossed them by making Robert Kennedy the attorney general and then
which he
launching a
did.
war on organized crime. And yeah, there were a lot of people. The CIA hated Kennedy. They thought that he betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs. And yeah, so there were a
They
lot of
betrayed him
players
at
in
the
that
Bay of Pigs.
assassination.
They didn't have, it wasn't lack of air support, it was lack of ground support. And there was a lack of ground support because the weapons they said were there weren't there because they'd been diverted to Israel.
Yes.
Now, and James Jesus Angleton didn't care. He's the counterintelligence czar and a complete Zionist. So were the Dulles brothers. I mean, they were wrapped
Hmm.
up in that, the Numek affair and the rest of it. You reminded me of that, the government regulation. Like, what about all these rating agencies that gave AAA ratings to subprime mortgages?
Yeah,
And they're
that's
just saying,
another
"Oh, we're just bad
example
at our
there
job,"
where,
right?
well, you know, it's no different than all these so-called experts who are telling us that the vaccines for COVID were safe and effective. It's just part of the wallpapering to, you know, convince people that they should go with a certain product or service. But you're right; these financial rating agencies, which people rely on to determine what is a good investment, were out there rating these mortgage bundles back in 2008 as triple A, and they absolutely were not.
They emailed
So,
each other, "Look at this Saga sugar honey iced tea I just offloaded on so and so." So they definitely knew better.
yeah, they did. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street, but it has
I
a you
tried.
know a
It was,
certain degree of truth and accuracy in it.
I wanted to see it and I was interested in it, but I was watching it on an airplane and the audio is so bad that I'm like, I don't want to ruin this by having bad audio through the whole thing. And then I just never picked it up again. It'd be
Okay.
hard to watch in Japanese.
Yeah, I can imagine. I
Yeah,
can imagine.
it's too high level for me still. But it's a lot of what I did see was like, oh, I wrote about this. Like this is good. I was shocked that there was a movie because usually movies are, you know, not accurate. That
Well,
kind
this
of was
is
getting
based
into it.
on the book, you know, The Wolf of Wall Street, that was written by the guy played by Leonardo DiCaprio, saying this is how it works on Wall Street.
Mhm.
And, you know, following along other movies like The Big Short, you know, people were kind of curious what's going on? How does Wall Street really work? And, you know, Wall Street doesn't want people to know how it really works because then we stop investing in various stocks and other issues. And we, you know, we put our money into silver and gold and, you know, bury it in the mayonnaise jar out behind the rose bushes.
I'd like to get Nancy Pelosi's tax returns. She did all that screaming for
Yes.
Donald
Well, they've
Trump.
set a
Let's see
dangerous
hers.
precedent, you know, with Donald Trump. And now a lot of people are saying, you know, let's look at all these members of Congress who are being paid, you know, a little over $100,000 a year, and all, and they leave office as multimillionaires. You know, what's
Liz
going
Cheney.
on? And is there a lot of insider trading? To which the answer, of course, is yes. And there was actually an attempt some years ago to tighten the insider trading rules with regard to Congress. And to nobody's surprise, that got voted down almost unanimously.
There must be something. I mean, I can't think of a more obvious insider trading or government subsidized industry than war profiteering, where you buy a bunch of stock in Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, what have those kind of things, and then start a war in Ukraine, right? And then they go, oh,
Yep.
we're going to send you tens of billions of dollars, and then you're going to buy HIMARS and javelins and other Lockheed products, Patriot missiles, and so on,
Well,
and
war
Neptune.
is big business. And, you know, Eisenhower in his farewell address warned us about the military industrial complex, and everything that he predicted has come to pass. And, you know, considering that he was the supreme Allied commander in Europe in World War II, he actually became one of our most anti war presidents when he was in office. And if you've never read it, you need to go back and read his famous Cross of Iron speech. And he had seen the horrors of war close up and decided this was not a direction he wanted the country to go.
Unfortunately, his MIC speech was in his farewell address. I wish that had been his opener, but He
Yeah.
saw it coming. Kennedy dealt with it too. He dabbled in it though. He and McNamara acquired a bunch of money for the new fighter jets in Vietnam, and it's unavoidable with the lobbyists. It's almost like you can't really ascend to power without the donor class behind you, and that you
True.
don't get their support unless you bend the knee. We had this new Freedom Caucus going against the swamp, we'll just call it. Think about 20 members of Congress, the same 20 that didn't do standing ovations for Zelensky when that criminal came and gave his stupid
Yes.
speech and put a Ukrainian flag with Nazi symbols up in the house. Disgraceful. Um, they were saying, look, we want concessions. We want, and we all know January 6th was FBI COINTELPRO, where they waved him in and
Yes.
everything, right? Um, we know that the COVID vaccines are harmful. Blood clot deniers can say whatever, but we didn't have all these athletes and newscasters, comedians just dropping dead randomly in the past. I guess you could say, well, maybe that's just part of COVID because we really don't know what the long multi-year effects of that disease are either. But Dr. Fauci should be brought before Congress because NIH did fund Wuhan lab gain of function
Yes.
research through Echo Health. That is a fact,
And there
right?
were more biological warfare labs in Ukraine. Russia's destroyed a great number of them. The
Yep.
U.S. is now relocating some of those others to other countries.
They still haven't gotten the gain of function research on anthrax that was used on September 11th out of Dugway and then Fort Detrick. And that was
Hmm.
not Bruce Ivins, and it was not Perry Mixel, and it wasn't Stephen Hatfield. Um, I've actually have a timeline of who did do it written all out. I mean, you know me and 9/11, but like
Hmm.
it's there's so much stupid about that event, like people that deny airplanes and all this other jazz that whatever I say just gets lost in the ether of, you know, kookery, I guess. But there was gain of function research on anthrax. They did add accelerants to that to try to kill two senators. And Patrick Leahy had the Leahy Amendment, which would have ended all military aid to Israel. So they tried to kill him.
Hmm.
That thing didn't go through. And, you know, the Israelis blamed it on Muhammad Atta, who allegedly got the anthrax from Iraq in Prague. And
Hmm.
they went to war in Iraq. All these things, all these lies would not have worked. We wouldn't have had a war in Iraq or Syria or Libya or Ukraine if people had just been allowed to tell the truth. But you really can't do it anymore. You can't say this. You can't talk about COVID on YouTube or Twitter, even with Elon Musk. You can't talk. You couldn't talk about Hunter. You can't talk. You can't tell the truth about Russia and Ukraine. I mean, good Lord, they had a Maidan coup in 2014. You and I had talked about it before. Just Pep Escobar, Ritter, a lot of people have been talking about this since the coup and the war in Donbass. I know what really happened.com has covered it the whole time. And then they, for Johnny Q Public or whatever, just like, oh, last February, Russia invaded out of the blue for no reason, unprovoked. They kept saying, like,
Yeah, they
too big
kept
to fail,
saying that.
unprovoked and unjustified. You can argue about the justification, but you cannot say unprovoked. They were hitting Donbass with heavy artillery, and they broke the Minsk Accords. And then Merkel comes out and admits, yeah, that was just to buy time so we could arm our side and build up, you know, NATO de facto, right? De facto NATO force
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
Ukraine. I understand completely Russia's position, and I think they should have done it earlier. I mean, trusting the West is dumb. That you shouldn't even talk to us. Everything we say is a lie.
Well, Russia is starting to go public on that. That the West is completely unreliable. They break treaties all the time.
Hmm.
They use lies and deception. Remember Saddam's nuclear weapons, which turned out not to exist.
Oh yeah, the smoking
Russia
gun.
hacking the 2016 election, which was another lie.
Yep.
And that seems to be the motto of Washington, D.C. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. And some of the lies are really kind of dumb. And it's like the government is convinced that the American people are incapable of actually thinking these things through. Like a good example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Yes.
You
The
know,
dumbest lie
Russia
of the
blew up
year.
their own pipeline. Russia didn't need to blow it up. They've got the valves on their end where they could shut off the oil and gas in Europe. The pipes were destroyed so that Russia couldn't turn the oil back on if Europe moved away from the United States and towards Russia. And, there's this very obvious avoidance of the subject. In the Western media, I said, Putin did it. That's all we're going to say. We don't need to investigate. We don't have any evidence. We just know it had to be that evil Vladimir Putin. But it just doesn't make sense. It's like when they were saying Assad was gassing his own people.
Right.
Why? Doesn't make any sense at all
Or
that
that
that would
Russia
be
killed
happening.
Litvinenko with polonium because, when you need to kill a low-level mob guy who's already got the mob after him for turning on 8 underbosses, that you're going to use a $11 million radioactive poison to kill
Yeah.
someone instead of just stabbing them or whatever. It didn't make any sense. It was a botched smuggling operation and he accidentally OD'd. That's all that happened. But they just said,
Okay.
Russia did it. And who was saying that? Boris Berezovsky, who was exiled from Russia for all of his crimes, right? But the British went with that. And I think I think the Nord Stream pipeline, Russia bombed its own pipeline, is now the dumbest. That's the new champion. But I think the prior to that, it must have been Hillary Clinton's lie about Benghazi and how they got mad at a movie on
Yeah.
YouTube. That was up there. Like, I don't know if you could think of one dumber than those two.
Well, they're all pretty dumb, and in fact, I don't think I've heard of a really good, clever lie come out of this government in decades.
Mm. Have they had any clever lies? That is a good question. Chat,
Yeah, I
of
think
any of
that's
that.
a good. I mean, Vince Foster killed himself, and why? He was resigning from the White House, and people commit suicide only when they feel hopelessly trapped, and it just goes on and on from there. Hillary's whole thing about how the Russians were hacking the election, and it turned out it was Hillary hacking the election. About
Yeah,
how
Twitter and
Russia
Facebook
was
actually
doing
did run
business with
interference.
Donald Trump when Hillary was right in the middle of the Uranium One deal.
Oh, how about they called Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist that went around shooting black people? That was pretty far fetched. It's like
Yeah, that
it's
was
on
definitely
film.
out there. That was definitely out there. I mean, they definitely need to hire some better writers. I mean, this stuff wouldn't even make a B movie script out in Hollywood.
You couldn't get this in late 80s WCW script writing for the
Yeah,
women's division. Like you
you're
couldn't.
right about that. Yes.
I think we need Scott Steiner up there as Speaker of the House. I think that would be awesome. Have
Well, I thought it was great that Matt Gaetz actually nominated Donald Trump, which legally he could have done, but Kevin McCarthy did nail it on the 15th vote. And great. Another California libtard in charge of the
shit.
House of
Did he
Representatives.
do some concessions at least? Or are you just gonna lie about that as well?
Well, it all comes down to, can Kevin McCarthy's word on these things be trusted? And I
No.
do know there's already a move in the House of Representatives to defund those additional IRS agents. I don't know if they're going to succeed. The Senate won't support it. Joe Biden will probably veto it.
They should
Frankly, I think we ought
still,
to send.
as you say, force the dictatorship to act like one. Like, go ahead and
Yeah,
make them veto it. You know what I mean? Like, make it on them so that that's part of their record. My
true.
dream for Donald Trump is to have him as press secretary. Wouldn't
That would be interesting.
I that's another one where I thought Psaki was as low as you could get, and then this Jean-Pierre Karine, whatever,
Yeah,
that is the dumbest person in government. Like she's Kamala Harris level stupid.
yeah, I'm afraid she is, and that's pretty bad.
Kamala Harris, you could do a whole skit just on her, but she said when she said Russia's a big country, Ukraine is a smaller country in Europe, that was pretty low. And our other one was viruses are very, very small. Well, thank you, Kamala. I never would have
Yeah,
known.
we kind of already knew that.
Well, there are people who think they aren't real. So, I mean, it's endless, and I feel like because we don't have free speech, you get these echo chambers of the. I don't think the conspiracy, and I'm not against conspiracy. I think conspiracies happen all the time, but there are
Yes.
some silly ones. Um, Airplane deniers, virus deniers, round Earth deniers, whatever, aren't any less kooky than Russia hacked the 2016 election. Rittenhouse was shooting blacks and like some of the stuff. The difference is the latter conspiracies are pushed by television, right? Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. These kind of things are
Yes.
blatant lies, are harmful. The saying the Earth is flat is okay. It doesn't really hurt anybody.
Well, that's
It's
being put
dumb.
out there to try and make the independent or alternative media look
Yes,
kooky, along with, the Apollo moon landings didn't happen,
right.
chemtrails and so forth and so on.
Chemtrail. Yeah,
But
it's kook by
uh,
association.
there was a story that broke today. I think Elon Musk is doing a good job with Twitter. He's releasing all this information, and it came out today, actually yesterday, that this network of doctors who'd been all over Twitter promoting mask wearing and lockdowns and spacing and everything, turns out they don't exist. It was a network of phony accounts that were
Wow.
set up to push the propaganda.
If only someone had said that earlier. But my Twitter's
Yeah,
still
but
banned.
at least we're well on our way to teaching the American people and the people of the world to be a lot more skeptical about what the government and the media is telling them.
I think COVID kind of did that. Like a lot of people that were on the fence about other stuff saw all the mask wearing and COVID theater and the lockdowns and so on, and then it just stopped, and you didn't have to wear a mask anymore. And it came out, oh, those weren't effective.
Well, they're trying to bring it back. They're already out there saying there's a new variant. It's even more contagious, and you're going to have to go back to wearing masks. And
Is it
everybody is
Nancy
saying,
Pelosi?
can't you guys come up with something new?
But I don't think that worked. Like 2 years was the limit. I always wondered, like, how long will the goldfish brain put up with this, right? And that was
Yeah.
something that if it wasn't like in a distance, it wasn't like, well, those are Iraqis over there, or those. It wasn't. It was. This affected everybody, right? Your kid
Hmm.
had to mask up to go to school. Some kids died playing sports because they're restricting their breathing as they're running, and they're afraid to pull their mask down. It was just it's ridiculous. This one was, I think, a lot of the plebs and the hoi polloi saw that and saw the skeptics, saw how censored they were, and then it turned out, oh, you're right. And Dave Smith pointed this out too. It's really hard pill for liberals to swallow because they consider themselves the sophisticated,
Hmm.
sciencey one. We're the science people,
Hmm.
and they got everything wrong. And the people out
Yeah,
there
well, that's
saying
the
you don't
difference
need
between
that
science
right.
and Scientology or scientism, where, science is treated as a religion beyond questioning, which,
Science is a
I
tool.
mean, remember Dr.
Mhm.
Fauci out there, I am the science. No, you're not.
It reminds me of
Bureaucrat.
Jim Leahy saying, "I am the liquor." That was that's what he looked like. I am the
No, that's
science.
Nancy Pelosi's line.
Well, oh yeah, she got. Remember, she was drunk. Did you see this? Well, one of the times she
Oh,
was
yeah,
drunk on
I
the
did.
podium saying, "I want to bomb some tanks," like slamming her jewelry on the wood. Oh, they had to get that hag out of there. Her husband, very eclectic person. He does his hammer time. I don't know if that's another story where it's like, well, what happened? The body cam footage shows him answering the door, walking toward the assailant. He's holding a hammer in his hand. What are you sleeping with bums? You doing drugs together? What's going on? That guy did not break into your house and hit you with a hammer randomly. Like
Well,
y'all knew each other.
this goes back to Paul Pelosi's DUI arrest because it came out there had been a passenger in the car who, for some reason, was, basically obscured, didn't say who it was, what gender they were.
Huh.
And, I think Paul's just leading a very kinky life and married to Nancy. Who can blame him, to be very honest? Uh, and the situation got out of hand, and then Nancy Pelosi tried to exploit it politically, saying, oh, this was an attack, by those ugly conservatives on my poor helpless husband. And
The
it
guy
just
lived in
it
a
didn't really get
bus
a
with
lot
the
of
Black
traction.
Lives Matter spray painted on it, and not that conservative. I guess for Paul Pelosi, the only people that swipe right on his Tinder are homeless people living in a bus with a mullet or whatever. Is it
Yeah,
right
I
or left?
mean, if you look at Nancy Pelosi's district, and then you see her up there in the House waving the Ukrainian flag and saying we've got to send more money to Ukraine, and her district is just filled with homeless people.
Mhm.
Crime is high. The place is falling apart. The infrastructure needs work, and
Did you
clearly,
know that San
go ahead.
Francisco has its own app called the Scat app to warn
No, but
people?
I'm not surprised.
There's so much human feces in, I guess, certain parts of San Francisco that it lets you know, like, steer away from this, like, don't go down this sidewalk. They're everywhere.
Well, I get that's a very telling thing. The funny thing is Claire, my wife, grew up in San Francisco, and we were actually living there briefly a few years ago when I was working on this movie, The Day After Tomorrow, and there was this effect shop set up in the Presidio, and we had this little tiny place that we were
Didn't Al
renting
Gore
on
steal
Hyde
some of your
Street.
footage?
Say again?
Didn't Al Gore steal some of the footage from your movie?
Yes, yes, he did.
he, he took the opening credits from The Day After Tomorrow and
Yes, he
acted like
did.
it was real
He ripped
glaciers
off
in
our movie,
Inconvenient
and
Truth.
but when we were there, we could see the beginning of the deterioration, but it wasn't too bad. But looking at it today, you know, uh, Claire and I, we often talk about, what would happen if we decided we wanted to leave here. We're currently in Indiana to be close to family. And we would never go back to California. And I loved California when I worked there, especially with NASA and the film industry. But we wouldn't go back there again. I don't think we would ever go back to Hawaii because, I mean, when we first moved there, the place was great. There truly was the spirit of aloha. And then the Democrats started working their magic. And by the time we left, I mean, homelessness was out of control,
Oh,
crime was out of control. We lived in a condo overlooking Pearl Harbor. Both of our neighbors were running drugs. One of them actually had a drug lab set up in their bathroom. I mean, and we were supposed to be a good neighborhood. Brian Schatz just lived up the street from us. He actually stopped by during Halloween with his kids, for trick or treating. And so it really kind of deteriorated. And,
it's gone downhill. I even heard New York was shipping their homeless people to Hawaii. I did like the Mariners Club though, but
that's actually been going on for a lot of years. And let's be honest, if you're going to be homeless someplace, Hawaii's kind of okay. But
not a bad place.
you
It's
know,
warm even at night, but
yeah, it is. You don't
it's
have to worry about
four
snow or
times as
anything like
bad.
that, just hurricanes and tsunamis. But we were working with some homeless activists there in Hawaii, and they said, yeah, it's common knowledge that cities on the mainland who only had a few homeless, they'd give them one-way plane tickets and just ship them off to Hawaii. And then Hawaii started trying to deal with the situation where if you were a homeless person and you could document that you had family that were going to take you in off the street, the government would buy you a plane ticket from Hawaii back to there. But it was an uphill battle. And there is a huge, huge homeless camp all along the shores of the center lock of Pearl Harbor. I mean, they work to keep them away from the tourist areas, but there is a huge homeless population on Oahu. And it was made notorious with an episode of Dog the Bounty Hunter when he had to go into this homeless camp to try and find somebody who had skipped bail. And it just really woke up the nation to what was actually going on there. And everybody was all upset. Oh, we didn't want the public to know about it. Uh, but right on the edge of that homeless camp, there is a school which for a while was sitting unused, and we actually used it as a location for a couple of episodes of Lost. And I remember just standing at that chain link fence and looking over and just seeing all the tents and the boxes, and it was really kind of upsetting. And we're sending all this money to Ukraine, and we have
Hmm.
homeless veterans sleeping in the streets.
Mm.
And I don't think that when we have any Americans sleeping in alleys or eating out of trash dumpsters, that our government has any right to send our tax money to anywhere, whether it's Syria, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iraq. Americans' money should be spent on Americans first and foremost. But that's just me, and they don't listen to me. So,
Put
what
America
can I
first, second, and third
Yeah,
as your kind of a motto there on what really happened.com for a
yeah,
long
it's one
time.
of our little audio bleeps.
I noticed I was in Hawaii right before the COVID, like right before they cut off flights, basically. Like the day I left was the last day you could leave. Barely
Yeah.
made it out of there in time. And then I was there when they reopened. I had a 6 hour layover and then on my way to Texas. And so I took my son to Waikiki. I was like, look, we got 6 hours. Let's go down there, go to Lulu's or whatever.
Hmm.
It looked like quadruple the homelessness that I'd ever seen. And there's
Oh
parts of
yeah,
Waikiki that
yeah.
always
It's
had that, but they were just, it was everybody. And
hmm
I saw the same thing in Venice Beach, which has always had a lot of homeless, but it was
hmm
4 times as bad during Rona season. They're
Well, I
everywhere.
remember my first experience of Venice Beach was on another movie called Skate Town, USA. It was actually the first movie I ever worked on. Patrick Swayze, it was his first movie, and you could tell he was going to be a big star. And, then Venice, was clean and funky and, bright colored paints, and, it felt safe. And then I got to visit Venice Beach again shortly before we moved out of Southern California. And it was just, how can we allow this to deterioration to be happening to our nation?
Yeah, I remember seeing it from Hulk Hogan. I mean, Terry's from Florida, but the character is from Venice Beach. So him and Mr.
Yes.
T used to do workouts and stuff at Venice Beach. And it was like, yeah, it was clean and colorful. It was like Okinawa kind of. And then now it isn't, it is just riddled with
It
tents
kind of
and
felt like a college town, and there was a lot of
mm,
filmmaking going on there. Besides our production, Battle Beyond the Stars was doing some of their effects work in a warehouse there, and it did feel, upscale, and it certainly is not that anymore. It's become a blight on Southern California.
I wonder if San Francisco accuses Hawaii of cultural appropriation for all the homelessness. Those are our drug addicts.
Yes.
Some
Okay.
of that does relate to the fentanyl and opiate epidemic of to the homelessness is people are so addicted to these drugs that when they got Rona checks, instead of spending that on housing or something responsible, went right to the drugs.
Went right to the drug dealers. Well,
Mhm.
there was this lady, homeless lady, was interviewed up in Portland, Oregon, and said, it's just easier to be homeless. I mean, they're feeding you. They've essentially decriminalized the drugs. So, why not just lie in your tent all day getting high, as long as you're getting fed? And, that's definitely the wrong way to deal with this. We have to give the homeless people a ladder up out of homelessness, and we have to incentivize their taking it, not just, treat them like a warehouse of unwanted people, and we'll just keep them doped up and drugged up and, keep them fed and then, pick up the dead bodies the next morning.
Mm. That's how the U.S. treats veterans, unfortunately. Just
Yeah, which I'm
cannon
very upset
fodder.
about. Yes.
I don't like it at all. And there are some people that are temporarily homeless just because like life hit them in the face, man. They're not drug
Yes.
addicts or anything. I can see that happening. I know a lot of people that used to live in their car or whatever. They don't now, but there are people that just hit a low point, man, just from something happened and you lose a job, you miss a couple paycheck. A lot of people are like two paychecks away from not being able to pay their rent,
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
the
something
economy,
happens and
the
they're
the
out.
inflation, fuel price. I mean, we just got our gas bill for the last month, which was a very cold month, of course, and yeah, it was not a pleasant shock to open that envelope. But yeah, the more corporations and the government take away from the people, the less resilience they have to keep themselves off the streets. And finally, they can succumb to despair. And like that lady in Portland, it's just easier to just lie in the tent and stay high all day.
Man. Well, I have a quick, like, no, I mean, 16-second sponsor from our folks over at Lot of Green Martin. We'll be right
Okay.
back.
Reed Martin, proud producer and proprietor, patriotic projectile party poppers. Got some uppity brown people making trouble for your empire? Replace them with a charred freighter and a cloud of white smoke. So remember, if your next geostrategic boondoggle's going awry, don't call us, we'll call you.
Lot of Green Martin. They're making the HIMARS in Ukraine. We've got about 4 minutes left. So, Mike, do you want
Okay.
to plug? I know there's whatreallyhappened.com. You've worn so many hats. You were a magician. You worked on movies. You worked for NASA, webmaster, radio host. What's what are you up to next for whatreallyhappened.com? I saw the site's really improved in the last few months. Got a new main menu.
Well, the older version of PHP went away, which forced me to basically create a new site, and I'm still working on getting the code on that working properly. And I'm 70 now, so there's not a lot that I can do that I used to do. So I'm going to be doing the radio, and I'm going to be doing the website, and other than that, I'm just taking care of my lovely wife, Claire.
And you have a VK as well. Do you have a Substack yet?
No, I do not. I spend a little bit of time on Twitter, but that's pretty much it. I'm really spending almost all my time on whatreallyhappened.com and my radio show over at Republic Broadcasting, and that's a pretty full day right there.
Yeah, RBN alone is a handful, and then you do 2-hour shows. You used to do 3-hour shows 5 days a week, which is, I don't know how you did it.
Well, a lot of coffee. Took a lot of coffee there, but shortly before he passed, Stedmiller said, "Just pull it back to 2 hours because I can tell you're getting tired." And there are some days where there's so much going on. I wish I was still doing a 3-hour show, but
Yeah,
I'm
sometimes.
content with my 2-hour program. And it still takes a lot of show prep to fill that up.
Hmm. I guess before I had 3 kids, I used to do all day. Like, I'd work on things, but they have almost all my attention. So
That's the way it
whatreallyhappened.com
should
is the
be.
main. Yeah, it should be. I think parents should, like, your career is just something to make money for your
Yeah.
offspring. Like, there's nothing more important than being a mother or a father. At least the best thing you can
Well,
do.
I always wanted to be a father. It just didn't work out. But I'm a really great uncle.
Yeah, I started as an uncle also. So, well, you're kind of a father figure, I guess, for a lot of people. I know so many people that found my work through you, found others through you, and just go to whatreallyhappened.com for their news, because there's a great news feed there that links to a bunch of other things. Antiwar.com is a bit like this too. I really miss Justin Raimondo. I wish he was still with us, but you can't, like, Twitter, Reddit, all this stuff is garbage. And if it wasn't for WRH, I don't think a lot of people would have the energy to sit there and sift through all the baloney and bogus corporate media to find the real stories. And really, if you go to whatreallyhappened.com, it's all the stuff you're not allowed to talk about, right? You can't talk about
Yes.
Jan 6. You can't talk about the virus. You can't talk about Hunter. You can't talk about Ukraine, Israel, Yemen, whatever. You can talk about it there, though. And I'm so glad you're covering it. I hope you have another 70 years.
Well, thank you very much. And don't forget, you still owe me pictures of your kids,
Oh, I got those coming.
so I can drool over them, and and be envious and jealous and so forth.
Well, that's, look, they all know who you are, and I will send you our Christmas photos. They're pretty good. So
Thank you.
thanks for coming on, Mike. Daniel McAdams is coming on tomorrow. We're going to be going over the great lies of 2022. He's from the Ron Paul Institute. You guys know who he is. So we'll see you tomorrow, same time on the Anti-Neocon Report. Sayonara.
Aloha.